Very impressive, right?
Well,
That's a huge idea.
As we say in our... No,
Yeah,
Leanne.
just take a seat, thanks.
As we say in our hood in the 9th district, urgeil.
Well done. Okay. We
no,
say in Australia, drop the mic.
Yeah. No, that's super impressive. It's super exciting. And we're very, very fortunate that we have another great female expert here on stage with us, Professor Katarina Adam from the HTW Berlin. Thank you so much for being here. We will continue talking about the topic of blockchain. And who else is there?
Yes, it's a great moment. 2 women on the stage. Thanks a lot for that. The panel is moderated by a great guy from Germany. The 2 ladies will be joined by Benjamin Rohe, the founding manager director of GTEC, who will moderate our next panel that will further explore what is really beyond the hype surrounding blockchain.
Very cool. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Have fun.
So then I'll take that one.
Excellent. I'm super fortunate to moderate the all-female panel here today. So we have already a little bit of a preview for next year's Darwin and Marie, which I learned today. Great to have you on stage. It was a very interesting, inspiring talk. I think that's the perfect intro for our little conversation that we have. So the title of the panel, I think, somewhat relates to release of McKinsey in June, which has exactly the same title, added to what is the strategic business value that's created out of the blockchain. And also, you were just talking about the World Economic Forum. I remember that was one of the most interesting topics discussed everywhere, even at the dinner and drinks in the evenings. And there was a World Economic Forum survey that suggested that 10% of global GDP will be stored in the blockchain by 2027. And your talk about the diamonds was, I think, already a very good intro for that part. But what do you think will be the main drivers to contribute to actually storing more economic value in the blockchain? What will be the next big things beyond diamonds and
Well, I mean, you have to have economic reasoning. So that's the first part. I mean, if we can anchor the use of the technology to an economic reason or a significant problem or challenge, then the natural evolution of the internet, it's here. It's not going away. So clearly it will evolve and has evolved and is evolving. And we will see this technology be as persuasive as the internet was since 1989. But we'll see it at a transactional level rather than just an information flow level. So we can start rethinking value chains. We can collapse existing value chains. We can start thinking about, which is what we do, when we have the diamond industry is controlled by 70% of large-scale mining companies, 30% is artisanal small-scale, yet 90% of the world's diamonds are extracted from some of the most poorest countries and continents on the planet. So if we're able to incept trust at origin and enable that to be persuasive across an entire value chain, then why couldn't some of the largest luxury goods companies in the world buy direct from some of the poorest nations in the world?
Yeah, I think that's a very well addressed point. And many people, they're always talking about cutting out the middleman, but never really see how big actually the middleman is in that value chain, especially when you talk about ingredients used in batteries and the diamonds. That is really a huge shift from value creation when you take out the middleman.
I mean, some of the middlemen are countries.
Yeah.
I mean, some of them are because they have the wherewithal, the education, the ability to build refineries. Why can't refineries be built in some of the poorest countries, right? I mean, some of them are countries of middlemen.
Yeah.
And if you add to the cobalt industry, for instance, how for an OEM, when you manufacture your car, how do you know where your raw materials are from? You have no idea, you have no clue. And you are aligned to the Dodd-Frank Act, for instance, so you have to make sure that you really have no, let's say, child abuse, something like this, in your supply chain. And how can you sign that without any knowledge about this? And therefore, you just have to trust somehow in our world nowadays. And with blockchain solution, we can overcome that we have to trust because it's too complex, the world we are in. And with blockchain, we can make it transparent. And that's the nicety, which I really appreciate, where I like to do my research on that.
Yeah, so since when are you doing the research about blockchain?
Since the end of 2014. So I got in touch with that, and first because I do my lecture in corporate finance, and the first time I heard about blockchain or about Bitcoin was with the Silk Road issue. And I discussed this with my students, and we came off that, okay, that's evil thing. And a good friend of mine, he told me, well, don't look at blockchain, Bitcoin, dive a bit deeper, check the technology which is behind. And it took me half of a year, and at the end of 2014 I thought, oh my God, what is in? And now that's the nicety. Every single day I wake up and I see what kind of really interesting field this is. You are exploring every day new sections and new ideas, how you can use this, where are the limitation, how to overcome this limitation, and so on. It's a thrilling part, really. And I only can invite all of the people, the audience here, be open-minded and see what is in.
Yeah, I remember in 2015 we ran the very first Blockchain Innovation Award, where we had applicants from all over the world. We were doing that in Berlin. And since then, something, and I think that's implied also with the title of the panel, it felt a little bit like the early days of the internet, everybody adding a .com to what they are doing, trying to be a tech company. And so now many people and many companies trying to add the blockchain phenomenon to their business, even if it doesn't make any sense, to attract more interest to what they're actually doing. So what would you say are the best ways to differentiate the good and the bad that is happening out there? I'm not talking about all of the token sale, fraud, and whatever. I think that's a completely different topic for itself. But from a technology use point of view, where does it really make sense and where does it make no sense at all to say I'm doing this on the blockchain?
Well, in general, I would not say this makes no sense. What you have to do, and this is, we have had a workshop this early morning, and some of these guys probably attended this. I see one lady, she's there. One of the biggest needs from my perspective is that you really have to dive into your processes. You have to analyze your processes you have in a company. And blockchain is very thrilling, but it makes very often no sense just to use it because it is a database and you have to make clear for which purpose you want to use that specific kind of database. Because the common databases we have in our companies, they are good. They are not that bad, but it depends on what kind of idea you want to follow, what kind of purpose you want to look at to use blockchain technology. And therefore, you have to do your homeworks pretty well. And if you do your homeworks good, then you will find out for which use case you can use blockchain technology, because it makes no sense to use for all and everything blockchain technology. This must be, a clear statement.
Thank you. What amazed me about your talk was the creator thought behind it, what all this transparency would bring, and we will talk a little bit about transparency later, but obviously this comes down to also implications on society, governments. What are your takes? I mean, you've been spending a lot of time thinking about that, so I guess that you have encountered a lot of interesting opinions and controversial discussions.
Government is always the slow mover in the room. It always follows social change and often at quite a slow pace. But we have seen, I've been in technology for 20-something odd years, and I was working in RFID in the mid-90s at the silicon chip and inlay level. I'm an engineer, and I spent most of my life in track and trace technologies. And the one thing that the RFID industry did not do was it wasn't able to run towards formation of standards and governance quick enough. There certainly was no appetite to move into an open source environment. And so therefore the innovation remained relatively proprietary and controlled by the 1% of the 1%. This technology is a people's technology, right? So it actually was born out of an open source construct day one. We don't even know who Satoshi Nakamoto really is. It's a pseudonym. It could be a person, could be a group of people. I think it's some kick-ass woman somewhere that's just managed to get bored of Sudoku and create something special. So I think, governments have an awakening towards this technology, and you've seen now even ISO standards being formed relatively quickly. Countries are leading in that formation, which Until now, we haven't necessarily had an innovation like this that has come to the market so quickly and so rapidly that is able to be used across transfer of value, whether that be in a crypto sense or a digital money sense, or whether that be in anchoring, a crypto anchor between a physical world and a digital world. The use cases that will come from this will enable the most, it will tip the pyramid upside down. If we can bring a sense of digital intelligence to those that have a challenge or a problem to be solved, or even a curiosity, this technology is so empowering that nation states are able to bring sovereignty to their identity of their people. We can start to truly digitize identity, and if you can digitize identity at a trust level, and I'm not talking about the government holding identity, I'm talking about me holding my identity and giving you the rights to see it, to use it, and for a particular purpose in time. So we will see this become the most important innovation, certainly of my life, there's no doubt about it. However, we won't be talking about blockchain in a couple of years' time. It will not be a topic. We will not be sitting on stage. We will not be talking about it. Just as though we're not talking about HTTP or the browser. That is not a topic of conversation. The companies that will survive and thrive on this technology are those that are solving a very real problem and that can separate the technology from the user design and the aspect of how this is going to be a technology. It should be as the air we breathe. It should be a baked-in, back-in protocol. And so we will see that flip happen quite quickly. There's no doubt about it. And we will also see a change in the way upon which blockchain is being used, because it was very early where a lot of people tried to understand it in really simplistic nouns. It's to do with scalability and transparency and trust. And so therefore we run everything in to give the transparency needed. But the reality is that we still have, commercial confidence and commercial confidentiality must still be kept with me, whether I'm an organisation or a person. So we will start to see blockchain being used in different ways, or cryptography really being the big winner here, not necessarily blockchain itself. So sorry to dampen that, but that's the realism when you work with it day in, day out like I do.
Thank you. And you just had your second blockchain conference in Berlin, so tell us a little bit about the state of mind of the inner circle of the people that are taking part of this event, because you have a lot of people that have been in the scene for a couple of years attending that. So where do they see the whole blockchain community heading?
We have had two parallel sessions. So one session was about ICO, the big hype about ICO and how to tokenize an asset or whatever, and what kind of problems are arising when you do your ICO. And the other one was about use cases, how to use blockchain, and identity management was one of the big topics to talk about how we can really do that. And for me, it is very important. I want to use also that kind of platform for my students, because my students, they have to work on blockchain use cases, and they should show their results also at this kind of stage to show they worked on what kind of use cases and what kind of results they found out. So this is a kind of a mixture, and I would like to bring together the government as well as the users in the way of the community, plus the financial parts and the academics, so that we have really a nice mixture, and it worked out pretty well. So the success was there, and I only can invite people to come next year to our third blockchain conference at my university, HTW.
It's next year in the summer, right?
Next year, 25th of July, so probably you like to come to Berlin.
Yeah, so talking about the ICO topic, I just came back over and over all the time when you talk about it. So this summer we were running the crypto startup school with the Frankfurt School of Finance.
Ah, yeah.
And obviously...
With Philipp Sander.
Exactly. This was a topic all over the place, but ultimately I think what was the main driver for all of this was actually the transparency that comes with blockchain, and it somewhat gives us the ability to build trust to interact with machines, because this is essentially what is necessary, and this is where we, I think, we come into a contradicting situation where we really used to have the human interaction, but I will have the human interaction in a much more digital way in the future. So what do you think, how can we educate people better to trust the process, to be involved and using this kind of technologies?
First of all, I would like to ask you, please define the way of trust. What kind of trust you want to see plotted in a blockchain, for instance? So, how do we interact? We heard about the Byton car, what the car will offer in the future. For instance, we see that it was a battery, and then it was smart car, and then it was autonomous driving. How, this is a path we are going through, and we have to learn to adapt these things. And the same as we have to learn to adapt things like this in blockchain. How can we use this, and how can we replace that common way of trust we are trusting nowadays? So we have to trust several things just because we can't, or we do not have the overview about the process, the whole process. We have to believe in that things are going right in the way we want. We negotiated things, and that the contract will be fulfilled as we negotiate this with our partners. There will be a lot of changes visible, and there will be also a lot of new technology or new feature in the market which helps us, and which helps us to use also the backup by a blockchain. And therefore, blockchain is an enabler. Blockchain is not the purpose for itself. We will use this in combination. And this is something you also mentioned, that it is not only the blockchain and now everything is fine because we used the blockchain. And the term the blockchain is wrong because we have several kinds of blockchain. So we have to discuss again for which purpose, what kind of blockchain, how we do want to interact with each other, and. So there's much more in this case. And therefore we have to think, what do we want to replace? What kind of environment we want to create, and how can blockchain help us in this way?
Thank you. You've been involved in the Barclays blockchain startup program in 2015, right?
Yeah.
It's been very early on in the days. We just talked about you. Been busy with it since 2014. We did the Innovation Award 2015. I think it was a different vibe back then, but is there any kind of interesting stories that you can share out of how a big bank was interacting suddenly with this kind of technology that is putting their existence at stake, and a lot of startups doing innovative things?
So I'm from Australia, clearly you can tell by my accent. I stumbled into London with a backpack, and the purpose for me being there was not to start Everledger. So to be honest with you, I came from the intersection of both jewellery and insurance. And so I came into London with the intention of going to Lloyd's, and thought, they're a big company, we'll get a contract and she'll be apples. Until I realised that Lloyd's isn't the company. I made a very big mistake. So I had to realise, how was I going to get myself out of this hole? And I knew that I had two very good skills. And one skill is I know how to drink a lot of beer. I'm very good at drinking beer. So I stood in front of Lloyd's every day at 11 o'clock drinking beer, talking to every single Lloyd's underwriter there was in the market. And the story goes that the second skill I have is, clearly I'm a software engineer, so I can, whatever my imagination is, I can write for myself. So there was a hackathon that was conducted at Google with Aviva, which is the largest insurance company in the UK. And I was there to Trojan horse the event. I wanted to meet the CFO to talk to him about jewellery and insurance. And I thought if I got him in the corner for 2 minutes, I'd give him my magical pitch. I could take my backpack and go home. And unfortunately, that day, I wrote the very first prototype for Everledger, and it was in 2014. And won the Innovation Award, and the Managing Director of Barclays Techstars was there and invited me to into the company for a conversation, which I thought, this is interesting. And as the conversation went on, they invited me into the accelerator, and I thought, this is great, free rent in London, awesome, I'll take it, I'll take that deal. And what I saw in 2014 was an entire floor within Barclays dedicated to cryptographers that were looking at this technology. Now, I'd bought Bitcoin in 2010, and so I was familiar with cryptocurrencies, and this is how long ago it was. Ethereum was in a test network, and at that stage, Vitalik was talking about calling it Homestead. So it's very, very, very old. And the banks were curious, and we never ever see banks flirting with curiosity. It's just not within them. And nor do we see banks really create environments for innovation. I mean, these buildings are depressing when you walk into. So I saw something completely different to what I'd seen anywhere else in the world. And as I began, highlighting conversations with them, I said, this technology, if you bring it back to its purest essence, is not necessarily just a crypto-driven tokenization platform. We can change the entire way we handle trust and business networks. And of course, banking is also going through a huge change in terms of its ability to be a bank of service rather than being a bank in terms of bricks and mortar. So there were a number of reasons why. It was the collision of the stars. It was a serendipity event of timing that enabled all of that to come together. And now you'll see 75-odd financial institutions are still flirting with the technology. I don't know that anyone has really run into production yet, but they're still certainly looking at it from a perspective of, futures. They're thinking it from a correspondent banking perspective. There are massive consortiums in place like R3 that have taken the world by storm. So I was there when all of that was happening. I'm kind of like the grandma of the blockchain, which is a real shame to feel that old when you're only 3 years old.
Well, if you can say that after 4 years, you see how fast technology is accelerating. So the last minute, just brief. We talked about in the future we will not talk about blockchain anymore. You have a next conference next year, so hopefully people will be still then talking about blockchain.
They will.
Next year, Darwin Circle 2019, where do we stand in terms of blockchain in society and business?
I would like to say that we will see blockchain which are able to deliver more transaction than we see right now. So, and therefore we come closer and closer to use blockchain technology in real business, and it will create a more stable environment that will really have good use cases to showcase that blockchain is worth to look at.
Cool, thanks.
We're going to see the rise of cryptography in a way that we can start to privately share information. So financial institutions that can't legitimately share information between themselves will be able to do so through like a zero-knowledge proof, the ability to be able to share secrets between each other, but also know the truth and the fact that sits behind it. So that's what we'll see, nearly like a reverse of how it's being used today. It'll flip on its head. Back that horse, that's a good number.
Perfect. So we're just in time. Katarina, Leanne, thank you very much. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.